So, a little about my history of connections with SOAS. SOAS, I say, some say SOAS, but anyhow, School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. We're having our centenary this year, celebrating in a couple next month, and but I wasn't there for 100 years. Gina came over here in 1981. We'd been off in Japan doing our PhD research together, and she was a little ahead of me because I'd swapped fields from linguistics, which I was teaching her at Michigan, to music. So I followed her over to Japan, and then I had to follow her to England when they suddenly hired her over the phone to teach in Cambridge. So we came over here, didn't have time to take a language course, but we hoped to have some success speaking, and somehow survived. Well, it took a few years. I had a research fellowship in Cambridge at a college, Clare Hall. We just celebrated 2 days ago their 50th anniversary, so it's a good year for anniversaries. Only 41 years for our wedding anniversary, coming up in a couple of weeks. Back to SOAS! So anyhow, after 4 years finishing her and my PhD thesis and doing a bit of teaching in Cambridge and other things, we went off to the Netherlands for a year, and just before we left, we both were kind of informed that we probably could come back to England. There were nice things setting up. Richard Wittes, a colleague at SOAS, told me they just got money to hire their first official music person. They had already, SOAS at the time, in what year are we talking about now? 1986, when we headed off to Leiden, to Holland. At that point, there was no music department at SOAS. They had several people studying music, but they were people. Richard had to teach Sanskrit for a while. David Rycroft, the expert on African music, who wrote the Swazi national anthem, was teaching Swahili. That was his job. And he was supervising 2 people doing PhDs on African music. And Owen Wright, who retired recently, was teaching Arabic and writing about Turkish and Arabic things, but also researching music. None of these people were in a music department because there was one. We had a Center of Music Studies, which is vaguer. There were some undergrads doing joint degrees, taking a few music courses and something else. The students from King's College London would come to SOAS to learn about the rest of the world. But there was no one devoted to music. Richard told me they had money and they thought I'd be a good person to hire because I covered Southeast Asia because of my interest in Java particularly, Indonesia, and Japan. And I could cover 2 of the regions of Asia and Africa that none of the current staff could cover. And well, if he's telling me I'm the guy for the job, what am I going to say? And so got interviewed, got hired, and we spent a year in the Netherlands and came back after Gina's job there had expired. At the same time she was offered, her professor back in Cambridge was struggling to find a way to keep her on there, and he found more money, so back we came. So in 1987, January, I began to teach at SOAS. And eventually a music department was formed. What order of history shall I go? I'm going to go vaguely chronologically. The first few years, again, we didn't have a music degree program at the undergrad level. I took over, the Africa fellow retired, and I took over his 2 African PhD students. One, Janet Top Farjan, writing about Tanzania. Zanzibar is now kind of the head of the world music section of the British Library. So she moved on well. Heather Luvuyo Donsa was down from South Africa. And so strangely, the first people I supervised were Africa specialists. I knew very little about African music, but that's the way it goes. Anyhow, I enjoyed my first few years as we built up a few students. I struggled to convince those King's College students that they should like the rest of the world, but some of them got the message, and eventually people like Shuri Tan, known well to you, did a PhD at SOAS. She was a piano student at King's College and fell in love with the rest of the world through our courses. Came to SOAS, did a master's and a PhD, and is successful now teaching at Royal Holloway. So these kind of things happened. We eventually hired a Korea person, Keith Howard, an Africa person, Lucy Duran, and added a couple others later, a Jewish music lecturer funded by the Jewish Music Institute based at SOAS. So the department built up, staff numbers built up from those days, and eventually they actually made a department of music, which was nice. Except I had to be the head of it for 4 years fairly early on. Blech. I'm not into admin. I did 2 different terms as head of department for about 7.5 years. But I did enjoy all of my 22 years at SOAS, even with the admin load. We had such wonderful students. One of them, very well known to you, is named Hui-san Tan, your partner San, and she just reminded me it was 1972 when...
92?
Yeah, that sounds better. Thank you very much. She would have been like, what, 12 or something back. Yeah, 1992, she came to see me when I was head of department. She'd been finishing up stuff at City University doing a lot of Western classical music things. Wanted to look into Chinese missionary music or Buddhist music or whatever. We had a long talk. And she wanted to do a master's that would include some Chinese music. At the same time, 2 other people, Rachel Harris, who is now she's been head of department for a while now at SOAS. She also, having spent some time in China, wanted to come and do a master's involving Chinese music. And Cheng Yu, an amazing pipa player, or lute player from China who'd been living in England for a while, they all came to me and wanted to do a master's with Chinese music. Well, up to that point, I was doing a couple passing lectures on Chinese music. We did not have a course on China. We didn't have anyone who knew a lot about it. I convinced the school to give us some money. I said, we've got 3 master students who are going to pay us a lot of money to be students, and they all want to do PhDs, and they'll stay on and pay, and they all did, by the way, pay a lot of money and become PhD students. Can you give me some money to run a course on Chinese music? And that happened back there in 93 to 94. I got in various experts, people like Steve Jones, Frank Koenhoven came over from the Netherlands to do some. I did a few lectures myself, some of them on the way that Korean music, or early Chinese court music had come into Japan and was still surviving there, blah, blah, blah. So we did a year-long course. And that was a nice thing that happened too. So gradually the music department built up, diversified. We eventually had a serious single subject undergrad degree available. We had a serious master's degree that until around that time, they were kind of weird master's things, not very clearly structured. And we had very few students, but now we get about 25 a year or more. Maybe it's up to 30. And many, many more PhD students have popped up. We eventually collected lots of instruments, like the Indonesian embassy gave us a set of Javanese gamelan instruments. Over time we've got other Indonesian instruments. Eventually, after I taught Javanese gamelan performance for a while, the school also was able to allow us to hire specialist teachers to come in and do performance teaching of certain instruments. And we've had one guy teaching gamelan for over 20 years now. Thankfully, I didn't have to do it all the time. So the department really built up, and numbers built, and so many of the people that have come through SOAS are out there professionally successful or struggling to be professionally successful, since there aren't that many jobs really for ethnomusicology. It's a much bigger world than it was. At the time I began, other universities in England where you could study some other music. It didn't have to be Western classical in other places. It could be a bit of jazz, but they weren't even sure about that. World music, which they didn't even quite call it then. Well, York had a bit of it. They had one fellow there who was teaching Neil Sorrell. There was down in Darlington College in the Southwest, a very arty place. It's partly university, partly funded by and created by an Indian musician and poet. They had a good little program there. They had people teaching African music and tabla drumming and stuff, and Balinese gamelan. There weren't many other places. There were maybe 4 places you could go and take courses in world music of some kind, if world music means something other than Western classical and jazz. Now they're all over the place, and a lot of our ex-SOAS students are doing a lot of this teaching at various places, either full-time or part-time. So I'm very happy about all that. And the negatives are that, if I had to think of negatives, Oh, I don't know. Let's think of the positives again. What did I enjoy particularly about it, aside from the students and the build-up of performance? My colleagues have all been pretty nice, and the real problem now is that as the universities in this country in general became more and more Thatcherized, and they wanted to have a business model to make everything much clearer in terms of income and outgo and all this, suddenly head of department types like me really struggled to enjoy life. You had to really think whether you could afford to do this or that. Do you have to dump some staff member even though you don't want to? Can you extend this person's contract? Those are the kind of things no one ever wants to think about, really. So far, we've survived okay, but it's gotten more and more business-like in the universities. Any university person will tell you this if they've been around long enough. And it's right now at SOAS and many other places, the whole question of whether, for example, a world music program is making enough money, or enough students coming in to really make it profitable to the university to run this. Partly they think, well, you know, Japan is going through the same thing, the place I do most of my research. The Ministry of Education, even the Prime Minister, are hinting that really these universities shouldn't be wasting time teaching the arts. Japan's copyright rates have gone way down compared to the rest of the world. They're a little embarrassed about this. So they're thinking we have to do more science courses, more high tech and all these IT, the modern stuff that makes sense. Maybe even medicine, physics, things like this. But, you know, who needs music and other arts? You know, literature, who cares, you know? That's happening in England to some degree too. And even at SOAS, as they struggle now with financial problems. Who knows in the next year or two what's going to happen to music? If you put it that way, I couldn't have been there at a better time. If I'd been there a few years earlier, early 80s or 70s, there have been music people at SOAS back in the 40s and 50s, and people writing about Japanese music theater who were teaching Japanese as their main thing, or an Indian music person who could write about Indian music but also had to teach about other aspects of South Asian culture. I was there just at the time when we finally had a department. We had a hell of a lot of students. We had a wonderful performance program set up with a lot of different types of music being taught. All of these things weren't there before, and they're under threat now. You put it all together, you know, I just think I couldn't have been there at a better time. So if there's a negative, I can't think what it is. I won't bother.